and welcome to episode 82 of our SAP on Azure video podcast. Today is March 3rd, and together with Gordon and Robert, we're here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So today we go back to our roots and look at a real SAP on Azure topic. So in recent episodes, we talked a lot about the Extend and Innovate story. We looked at Azure monitoring for SAP, securing your system with Microsoft Sentinel for SAP, looked at special storage topics with Azure NetApp Files, the quality check tools, and so on. And in this episode, we now have Anbu and Momin joining us, and they will guide us through the process of migrating an SAP system with a very, very large database to Azure. But before we hand over to them, let's quickly look at some of the news from this week. And I want to start with another blog post from Martin Pankraz. And he's focusing on the business technology platform and the private link services again. So remember, he has quite a lot of blog posts there that outline how you can connect your business technology platform, your SAP business technology platform, with other services running on Azure. And you might know that not all of these services are supported yet. So on the Microsoft side, there are a few Azure services that are not supported in this context. And Martin outlines how you can still connect to these services there. So basically, yeah, this would be the ideal picture, basically, where you have your business technology platform and you can access any service via private link on the Azure platform. And unfortunately, that's not possible for all the services. So what he's showing are some workarounds. So basically, for example, if you put a web dispatcher here on Azure in between, then you can use this as a proxy to basically, access all the services. And he's using Azure API management as an example for this. So a nice blog post that outlines how you can actually use also non-supported or non-officially supported services on Azure with the private link service. Another blog post, or actually a document, is this operational purchase chatbot, purchaser chatbot for SAP S/4HANA. Actually, you might remember we have talked about the collaboration that we're doing between SAP and Microsoft when it comes to the Teams integration. And we talked about the SAP Sales Cloud integration. We talked about by design in Teams, these scenarios. And now SAP released this document that talks about the SAP S/4HANA chatbot integration into Teams. The great thing here in this document is actually that it's also talking about the whole single sign-on concept. So Martin Repple, who hopefully will also join us next week in our podcast, also helped here to set up the whole authentication, the single sign-on authentication between a user that logs on in Teams, and then the user is propagated to the SAP system using the business technology platform, using the identity authentication service on the SAP side. And this document basically outlines all the required steps that are required to set up this end-to-end flow. There is actually also, I'm probably not going to find it, but there's a link then to the developer center where you can download the resources to get started. So I think this is a nice tutorial, nice instruction of how you can integrate Teams or create a chatbot scenario in S/4HANA. The next blog post that I want to highlight is this one from Mohammed, talking about SAP Password reset using Azure Logic Apps. And the interesting thing there I find is I often get questioned, well, what can you use Logic Apps for? And the thing is there are so many use cases that it's sometimes, I mean, they're the obviously data integration topics where you can just connect two systems and use Logic Apps for that. But it's actually much more. And I really like this approach here from Mohammed, talking about using Azure Logic Apps to reset passwords. So he outlines the steps that he did with this low-code approach, basically with Logic Apps, where he simply created a flow where he's using the HTTP connector then to connect to the the BTP, the integration service, and then really using this flow to connect to the ABAP system, to the SAP backend system, and then do the password reset. So it's a really nice implementation, I think, of logic apps. A really nice usage scenario that just shows the flexibility of what you can do with logic apps. With this, there was another really cool blog post from Goran. Maybe Goran, you can talk a little about that one.
That's a long story and a lot of work. We have many customers who initially, I mean, HA topic, of course, it's my baby, you know, so my professional deformation, yeah. So anyway, many of huh?
One of them.
One of them, yeah. Many would use initially availability set as a construct, giving us 99.95% of availability. And then later we introduced Azure Zones, which gives you across the 2 data centers high availability with 4 nines. And there were questions of customers how to migrate in an easy way. And basically, unfortunately, we don't have yet the tooling in Azure, which would do out of the box, and that was the motivation, basically, to develop the scripts, which would do the job. And as well, also there is, which was also a lot of work to, also there was a below on the bottom link to the white paper actually, which is going into very detail how to do it and how to potentially actually avoid the downtime if needed, if wanted, right? So yeah, that was on a GitHub, very long document which goes into very detail. The point is, Momin was working with one huge customer actually here, and initially it was an HANA system, and initially was like official homogeneous migration, like which would need 5 to 6 months to do it, deployed infrastructure, do this, do that, and here actually they did it over the weekend, actually in just a few hours. So that's the kind of benefit.
Yeah, definitely, Goran. That was tried and tested, and there was very cost-effective solution, because as far as trying to rebuild those VMs, and there's multiple teams building the OS and the HA and databases, so those scripts literally saved us a lot of downtime and project time. So it is fully tested and much appreciated.
But anyway, if anybody would use it, please test it in advance properly with ideally the same configuration as you would have it with your prod VMs, even if possible, same subscription resource group, same net if possible, same VM size, just to make sure that it kind of really works, because I can't control everything. I mean, we have challenges with the collocation stuff and finding resources, so it's good to test it in advance. Yeah. Yeah, so that would be about that block. Another one, it's also one nice, interesting blog from Martin. So he was publishing in the past this copy functionality. Basically, you can copy the whole environment with also the SAP system, even copy it across the subscriptions as well. So here he's just telling about giving some tips and tricks for this tool, or introducing some features. So for example, use the cost-efficient storage. So during the copy, for example, you could specify to use the standard storage, which is much cheaper, right? For example. And another thing, what he's telling also, how you can archive the existing system inside of a blob, which is also very cheap, and also restore it, basically, so to say. So it's all about cost saving on the storage side. I mean, if you don't use the system, you stop it, you don't pay for the compute, but how to have some cost savings on the storage, because storage is always there, right? Premium is costly and standard it's not, and even blob it's even cheaper. Yeah, so nice, useful stuff, I would say, definitely. Perfect. For the community to take a look. Yeah,
cool, great. Then we have 2 more announcements for upcoming events. So there's one event about the event-driven architectures for SAP. So it will happen on March 8th. And I think actually this is a pretty cool event. We have Clemens Wasters doing the kickoff, talking about event-driven architectures. So what is an event-driven architecture? Why does it make sense? Why are customers adopting it? I think that this will be an interesting kickoff. Then we have two customers basically, or we have Siemens talking about how they are using event-driven architectures in their scenario. Then we have Microsoft Digital. So Kevin Wilson is talking about how Microsoft is actually using event-driven architectures, sending obviously events from an SAP system into Azure. Then what do we do with these events in Azure? And then we also have Carsten Strothmann from SAP talking about these integrations. So I think if you have not yet registered, it's a, 2 hours event or something like that. So I think it's definitely worth listening in for 2 hours. The last information is for our German listeners. So the DSAG Technologietage are happening in May again, finally again, an on-site event. I'm really looking forward to that. Obviously also from Microsoft, we have a track we talk about. We have some customers talking about running their SAP systems on Azure, talking about their migrations and stuff like that. We have a few other sessions there around the extend and innovate story with SAP. So if you're there, if you are a DSAG member, I can only encourage you to join, and maybe we'll see each other there. Good. With this, that was all basically for this week. With this, let's hand over to our guests. Maybe Anbu, Momi, maybe you can introduce yourself, and then I'm really looking forward to hear how you actually migrate such huge systems to Azure.
Thank you, Holger, Robert, and then Goran for having us here. It's a pleasure to be here. And then quick introduction. My name is Anbu Govindasamy. I'm based out of Silicon Valley, California. Been with the Microsoft for the last 3 years. Do practice SAP for the last 25 plus years. Prior to that, I spent about 20 years with IBM. Here today, we are going to talk about migrating a very large database. We are talking about 100 terabyte neighborhood database size. How do we really approach it and migrate to the Azure? Before we get started, over to my colleague, Momin. Go ahead, Momin.
Yeah, thanks, Anbu. It was a pleasure to be here. Momin Qureshi, been at Microsoft for the last 2 years, been in SAP in basis administration and architecture for the last 20 years. And I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and really excited to be on this podcast today.
Thank you. Let's get started. And then, Momin, if I ask you, how do we approach these 100 terabyte databases? I mean, we don't do this quite often.
Most definitely, Anbu. I'd probably just go back to, maybe some time ago. I remember customers saying that we'll put the sandbox or the development system on Azure. And now we're bringing over these 100 terabyte ECC, absolutely critical financial systems to businesses, and they're running performant, they're stable. So it is an absolute amazing journey. So this is a little customer scenario. I'll give a quick background here that this customer ran ECC, Oracle. It is their crown jewels, running on a multi-node rack, Exadata. And they actually have workloads in Azure. And they've mentioned, hey, Momin, we love Azure. We like the ability to scale up VMs, scale down. We like all the eco products, Azure Monitor, Azure Backup. But can we really bring this, 100 terabyte Oracle ECC? If it's down, it's, big financial loss for us. And we really talked about it, and we said, well, let's do a POC, and we're going to find out. So I'll move over to the right side of the screen, technical analysis. And I've done quite a few migrations. And one thing I notice sometimes when we do analysis, we're just sort of mapping CPUs and memories, but there's a whole lot that goes to a 100 terabyte Oracle system, right? So we asked the customer to send over early watch reports, AWR reports, different OS and storage metrics. And we really get deep dive into that, the size of the database, the version of Oracle they're running, the parameters will have to switch from running from a rack to a single node system. What are the throughput needs? What are the network needs? Going through all those configurations and really getting intimate with the analysis where what are the critical tables, how many sessions do they have, all that type of stuff. So to really understand where we're coming from. So now that we have that technical analysis, how do we design in Azure, right? And I actually have the note, I should have put it on the slide. Note 192.8533, I think we all know that note, is the first thing that I tell people to take a look at, because that note really tells you what is certified in Azure. Mm-hmm. What are the different combinations of OSDB that's supported. And it has a lot of the SAPs ratings and things like that, which is important as well. So really understanding those things, the network throughput, the Mbps we need on storage, that will be sort of our initial, stab into the architecture.
Can I quickly ask a question? Because I think, especially when we come on to the topic of running Oracle in public clouds, I think there are a lot of limitations or restrictions. Yes. So I think that is very often a question. In your specific case, what was the operating system on premises, and what was the operating system now that you selected on Azure?
Yeah, on Azure, it was, obviously we run Oracle Enterprise Linux, and not only at the database, but anything with an Oracle client. So for example, the app servers, we also use Oracle Enterprise Linux. For the ASCS ERS, there is some variation you can use there. Mm-hmm. Anbu, I don't know if you remember the exact, what was on the source of the Exadata OS system.
Red Hat or in a couple of cases, Red Hat or Oracle Linux.
Yeah.
So okay. in essence, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's a great call out. Those are really nicely documented in our OSS note that Momin already called out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And then with that analysis, that's a great segue. Momin, thank you for really, laying the foundation of initial conversation. Now, let's look at dive into the compute design. When you think about from Azure standpoint, do we even have a SKU? Do we even have a really IO profile to meet the customer requirement? Do we even have a somewhat really a license-friendly SKUs? Not only just a SKU which does the work, we also need to be mindful there's really the cost associated with the vCPU. How do we do all that? So in essence, when we analyze, we were able to, the simple building blocks, check and make sure the vCPU is met. And the next is really the check and make sure the RAM, which is really going to translate directly into the SGA, especially for your read throughput. If you have really a large number of reads coming in a large databases, you want to have really a decent number of SGA. We're talking about 4 terabyte, at least 60 to 70% of that memory fully allocated for SGA. That's something that we recommend and then proved out to be good in our case. Then look at the IO profile. When you look at the IO profile, our IO channel today gives about 80,000 IOPS or 2 GB, capital GB per second throughput in a managed disk. But on the other hand, when you look at the network interface, that gives about 3.75 GB per second throughput. So literally like double the throughput. And then what we ended up doing is we ended up taking a storage layer which will take advantage of the network bandwidth. So we'll talk about in the next slide how we position the storage layout to meet the higher throughput and whatnot. So in addition to this, let's talk about quickly while we are here, what is really the license-friendly SKU really means? And we have in Azure something called constrained vCPUs. So what that does is it'll give you a really let's take an example here, M8, tone it down to 4. What that means is your CPU will go down from half of it or even 75%. But on the other hand, you would maintain your network bandwidth the same level as M8,
yeah.
IO bandwidth same level as a M8. So in essence, the RAM also will be maintained at the same level. So those are the 3 things that are super critical for database, not so much core count. So having this kind of really the license optimized SKUs are really very beneficial from the licensing standpoint. Mm-hmm. If we really go down quickly to the SAP OSS note, these are really well documented as well in 192.8533. If you come down and read about it, how do we do the sizing on this? The whole thing is clearly called out. This is a block I encourage if you're in a situation where you're looking for Azure SKUs license optimized for running a massive Oracle database, or it could be DB2, it could be Microsoft SQL for that matter. And then with that, let's go back to the slides. That's how you pivot on a compute. Once you decide on a compute, now the most important thing that comes on the table is really the storage. As I called out before, you got about 80,000, you got about 2 GB on a premium or ultra, whereas for a large database, we probably need a lot more IOPS, a lot more throughput. So we ended up really pivoting on ANF. What the ANF does is it uses the NFS protocol, which is Azure NetApp files. And then NFS protocol goes through a network interface. It doesn't go through your IO quota. This is how we opened up the IO channel by taking advantage of the NFS protocol. That's number one. Along with the NFS, especially in Oracle, it has a feature called DNFS, direct NFS. What this does is it takes the NFS client, integrate with the Oracle software such a way that it just expands. I mean, it really optimizes your IO path as well as the network path. So it does have a significant performance improvement. So we were able to take all that part of our equation to enhance our story and then even meet the 100 terabyte worth of database IO requirements, right? And while I'm here, even though we say 80,002 is where it is today, I want to call out something evolving over there in Azure Set, which is pretty like a promising and entertaining. Let's look at this one. If we go to the V5 series, in the V5 series, now we are 96 is certified as per our OSS note. Now you can go literally up to this is really E5, right? It's a E5, and then as you can see that the network, the number of IOPS is increasing. The throughput is increasing up to 4 GB now. It used to be 2 GB, predominantly on all SKUs in Azure. With the newer SKUs, even in the managed disk, we are able to push our throughput really like to the higher limits. And even the network interface, it goes even under gig in a 104 SKUs. What we are saying here is we are constantly evolving. While we say that ANF is a good fit on this case, there is also constant changes happening on both sides. Can we even go beyond 100? These are the SKUs probably can help us even to bring even bigger than 100 as well to the table.
And basically, when you use ANF as a network storage, so all the communication goes through the VM network. So therefore, the network bandwidth is hugely important here. I mean, Absolutely. If you would use a premium storage or an ultra, okay, it has a separate dedicated throughput, which is a storage one, but ANF is a network base. So then these right column, it's super important, and throughput to achieve
Great
it.
Call out, Gordon.
Yeah. Good call out. Yeah.
Great call out. So 100 terabyte, what I'm talking about here is if I really do a divided by 8 from bit to the byte, you're talking about 12.5 capital GB per second throughput. That's like insane throughput that you get in a single VM. We're not talking about the data center. We're talking about a single VM getting like a 12.5. So that's just how we are pushing our VMs to the limit wise. Now let's dive into some of the features like a maintenance control. When you have a very large customer, when they're running a really hyper, like a streaming through the network throughput, and then there are some maintenance happen under the cover all the time in Azure or even any cloud for that matter. And then there is a very few second freeze happens. It can sometimes impact your workload. And Azure does provide a feature like a Azure maintenance control. Let's quickly look at it. How does that feature look in the portal itself, right? It's called maintenance configuration. Basically, you have to subscribe your VM. Only thing is the VM has to fall in the category of either isolated or dedicated. So again, I want to pause here and say, this is not required for pretty much most of the workload that we have it out there. This probably needed for a very super large sensitive workload, which is really running at a very high volume through the interfaces. Where can I really manage the maintenance itself? When you subscribe this VM, what happens is it's going to give you 35 days supply. Now you have ability to schedule it to the low business volume days, maybe on a Sunday morning,
Great.
2 a.m. So that's really the ability you have. Now you're basically taking control over the maintenance that Azure applies and then target it to the align with your business requirement and say, here is my quiet time. There's not many batches are running or many like a business critical activities are going. And once in a week or once in a whatever the month, you could schedule it and then position it. That's a capability we took advantage as well.
Or I can combine the Azure maintenance with my plane maintenance, like operating system patching or Oracle patching. Yes. So combine that in same window and use that like a window where I can do maintenance in both cases, Azure and my internally VM, whatever is running inside.
Absolutely. You nailed it. And these are all good, right? We talked about everything. Yeah, great. I mean, you all looks good, but how do we just confirm that it really met the requirement? This is where I'm going to really bring Momin back. Momin, maybe if you can tell us, how do we do the platform test to make sure what we say as a target architecture can really hold good for 100+ terabyte sizes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's quite a different ways, right? We can set up a full SAP system and do some kind of testing. There's different load testing products, but really this customer mentioned that, look, we don't really have the time to set up a full SAP system, copy over the database, and then really set up all the business users to do testing or run some kind of scripts or load runner or whatnot. So we use Oracle RAT, real application testing. And really what this is that you can run this on your production system to do a capture. For our case, we did 2-hour captures, and in this capture, it will capture all your bad jobs, all your dialog transactions, and even obviously underneath that level, the inserts, the updates, the deletes, etc. It'll capture all that. It'll actually put that into a file, and then what we did was on Azure, we restored that database at the same time as the capture and replayed that capture. So this is really neat. I mean, it is, in that sense, the workload is identical, right? So we ran it, and from there we can really look at, what are the VM metrics? How busy is our CPU? Definitely, there's certain changes when we bring over a system from rack to a single node as far as Oracle parameters. Also, we have ability to have certain larger SGAs, so there's some decrease in the IOPS and needs of the storage. And one thing I wanted to mention that we used also snapshots with the ANF, where with the snapshot technology, we were able to take 100+ terabyte Oracle system, restore it back in 10 minutes. And how did that help us during our performance testing is we'd run the RAT and we'd notice something is slow. Maybe there's something at the OS, maybe there's a database parameter, maybe there's some application level tuning, indexes or statistics. We'd flash the database back and we'd make these changes and run the RAT. So, and we were obviously monitoring Azure monitoring dashboards. We're pulling AWR reports, storage reports. And at the end of the day, we were as performant or better in Azure than a bare metal offering, which was amazing.
Yeah, nice.
Question for you, Momin. And you said you did it in iterative fashion, 100 terabyte. How long it took to go back with the snapshot technology? Just
with
curious.
it was literally 10 minutes of snapback.
Wow.
Snapback 100, right? Yeah, that is amazing. And I imagine just in any kind of performant, right? Like before we do go lives and things, to be able to snap back a HANA or Oracle systems relatively quickly, and also just to guarantee, right, business continuity. If we had some kind of logical corruption, right, somebody moved a transport or dropped a table, we can restore back quickly. That's a lot of confidence for the business.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Let's move ahead. I mean, that's great story. Let's move ahead and quickly look at the dashboard. I mean, if you want to touch on the dashboard.
Yeah, I'll be quick on the dashboard here. One thing, and the customer really liked this as well. With Azure, you get all this stuff, right? There's no third party to install. There's no firewalls to open. This dashboard literally took us 10 minutes to create. And it gives us a real-time view, right? That when this RAT was running, I could see which SAP data are maybe being excessively hit. Maybe there's some tuning or data files we have to move around. I could check the redo logs. I could check read latency, write latency. I could see CPU all on a single pane of glass, right? I have 2 monitors. I could put it up on 1 monitor and watch it. And it literally took us 10 minutes to create. So definitely looking to use this also on other projects. So this is another thing at Azure that I don't know how long this would take at a on-prem offering or some other offering, but in 10 minutes here, you can create really neat dashboards. So very helpful tool for us.
Thank you, Momin. That's awesome. Let's dive into, we're talking about 100 terabyte business critical application, and then nothing goes without really having a proper HA posture. Let's quickly look at what are the HA posture that Azure offers. It does offer like plenty of options here. One of the things that we went with, we had first of all, we went with a cross-zone architecture to give a 4.9 SLA, because these are all business critical system. In addition to that, how do we really position the component in the availability zone construct to meet the 4.9 SLA? So we place the Oracle VM in one of the zone, and then the HA standby in another zone. And here is the thing: it doesn't require any pacemaker or any clustering third-party softwares. Oracle has a concept called Observer with a FSFO failover, fast failover service. Using that, we were able to place that guy in a third zone, which will act like a kind of, think of this way, act like a quorum or a witness to monitor these two, to orchestrate the whole failover itself. It's a pretty simple and sleek architecture. Again, let me repeat, there's no pacemaker cluster is required. There's no need of any like a OS level orchestration is needed. Everything is handled at the Oracle layer by the observer node. And typically we want to place them in the third zone, preferably in the third zone. By having in the third zone, you're kind of ensuring that the best possible orchestration in case of the failure happening in any particular zones. So we tested out the whole thing, and you could have even the observer standby node as well. We did this as well, just to really strengthen the HA posture even further. So this is one architecture we went with. We tested it. It's pretty sleek, pretty neat, and very easy to implement, and very native to the Oracle, DBAs and then Oracle experts to set it up. That's how we address the HA. Sure.
One question, maybe is, I don't know, maybe it's just on this picture, but there's a async replication between 2 nodes. So if it is async, what is the RPO, target RPO for that when we are talking about async, not sync?
Great question. So you have a maximum performance or maximum protection. There are 2 ways you can do it in Oracle. The customer went with the async only for the DR, and they went for a maximum protection. Part of it, you go back to the building blocks of Azure. There are always 2 zones favor you with a low latency. That's what we picked. And we place the observer in the third zone, which is slightly far away. So it depends on the region. Highly recommended to do the latency test and figure out the 2 favorable zones. Then you can decide whether you want to go with a maximum protection or maximum availability. Okay. So maximum protection is what we went with finally to do the testing. That's a great question, Robert. All right, with the HA, now let's go on to the application consistent snapshot tool. I know Momin touched on snapshot. What exactly it is? When you talk about snapshot, there are 2 types of snapshot. One is a crash consistent snapshot, another is an app consistent snapshot. Just to be specific, for an Oracle or any database, we need an app consistent snapshot. We need to prepare the database, then take the storage snapshot, and then release the database. That's how the snapshot sequence happens. That's why it's called app consistent snapshot. This is a first-party solution available in Azure, free of cost. It supports HANA. A lot of customers use it today for Oracle HANA today, and the same capability was extended to HANA as well. It does really coexist with your backend. It's in the preview to support even the managed disk as well. People know that it supports predominantly in ANF. Just to repeat, it does support managed disk with the preview product. And it also has an ability to push that snapshot to the blob if you ever want to do it using the run before and run after capabilities. So the capabilities are kept increasing. These are the things that came from customer, and we put it out there. This is our first party solution. Just to call it out, it's a free tool and nice, easy tool to use it. DBA friendly tool. And now let's move on to complexity. I know, Robert, you asked about how do we migrate this 100 terabyte database? I don't have, I mean, how much outage I have to have? The system like this doesn't go down more than 6 to 12 hours. If we tell them that you need really like, a couple of weeks to migrate, nobody's going to migrate. So nobody's going to migrate. So we need to solve that problem too. Smaller system, we went with just backup and restore over the weekend, perfectly fine. We got all running. People got a glimpse of how to really manage the system and run the system in Azure. Then by the time we come to HA, we took initial backup, push it out, took a long restore, then apply the incremental backup on top, then set up the data guard. That's how we got the system set up in the Azure. Then build the HA standby, then test out the whole HA. And then at this point, we not only migrated a 100 terabyte system, we also really did the HA test to make sure everything is in place. Then by the time we come to production, we know that bringing the 100 terabyte is already solved. Doing the HA is already solved. Now we have to add really the DR on top of it to make sure that we extend the data protection all the way to the end. So we did that test as well. So this is how we approached it. With this approach is really like, simple approach, nothing complex. It works for years. We just repeated it exactly the same fashion here for the 100+ terabyte. I would say that the testing is key. I know Goran called out while he was talking about his blog. What is the number one thing for you to be successful? It's all about testing, testing, testing. That's exactly what we did to get to the finish line.
But I think here is one very cool stuff that you use Oracle Data Guard as a technology to migrate such a big database system, SAP, and avoid the downtime, because basically it's just replicating the stuff from Oracle to Oracle, from on-premise to Azure. I believe you use surely async mode from on-premise to Azure, surely.
Absolutely.
And basically, what happened? When you do a switch from on-premise to Azure, you just stop the on-premise system. You synchronize the rest of the stuff, which is typically, I would say, it takes a very short time, and you flip over. That's it.
That's it. 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, you're caught up and you're up. And what you called out, this is the same technique that we used for another large customer for DB2 HADR, Oracle Data Guard, SQL always on availability, whether it is really a SQL replication, HANA replication. This technique is pretty proven if you go from 1:1. Unless you really run into the complexity of, let's say, really heterogeneous scenario, then you would have to use near zero downtime and other SAP techniques.
Ambu, one question.
Sure.
When you copy this initial backup before you start the data guard, yeah. So probably you have express route, private link, or implementation for private link. So from this customer use scenario, do you remember how much take to really copy this initial and how big express route was?
The express route was 10 G. Yeah, the express route was 10 G.
And how much
it took 3 days to really restore.
Okay.
And then that's because of a very slow restore. And then it's most of the time spent on copy, not necessarily in the restore. At the time of restore, we were literally streaming through the entire network interface.
Yep.
And,
okay. Thank you.
And then building the second system, interestingly for 100 terabyte, building the second system using an RMAN duplicate option, it took probably like less than a day. Pretty quickly, we were able to establish the HA as well.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah. And I think that's a good call out, because using export import here would be like suicide. I mean, from a perspective of a downtime, right? From a perspective of minimizing the downtime. And I mean, that's really nice story how to use at least in the homogeneous system copy, right? The database technologies to really extremely minimize the downtime, which is cool. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Goran, that being said, we are taking on larger workloads with some DMO, and there's some really neat stuff that definitely not as easy as the replication, but we're still getting it done in a weekend.
Yeah.
Major transformations, which is really neat.
Yeah.
It's always easy to see from the past to see how much we progressed. When I joined 3 years back, we had a 4 terabyte. Now we are talking about 12 terabyte and upper sizes. And then similarly, when I joined, we were doing 5 terabyte, 10 terabyte. We were overwhelmed with us. Now we are doing 100 terabyte, doing it at ease. So when you think about it, what else we can do in the next 3 years, it's just sky is the limit.
Cloud is the limit, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool.
Cool.
Great.
I mean, that's
Very interesting.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. And I think it is really, really impressive, as you said, where we started like 5 years ago, when it was when we had the Godzilla virtual machines with half a terabyte or something like that of memory, and now look where we are. It's just amazing. And what I also find very interesting is really the number of these customers with these huge databases that are now very comfortable migrating to Azure. So it's not a question of can I do it anymore. So it's okay. Let's do it. And that's something that I think is extremely great to see.
And when I hear from you, it's okay. One challenge is how to migrate with the minimum downtime, but on the other hand, I mean they are running productively, right? And they have even better performance compared to the Azure, at least with this customer. Yes. So this is really great to hear, right? So it's not just dev test stuff. It's really the monsters which is running in Azure. Yeah,
I think also what Momin mentioned is I think it's very, very important, especially for Oracle, that that we always need to first analyze what is running on premise. Do we really need those CPU powers? Maybe we discover we don't need all of them. Yeah. And also that we have exactly the picture what we also need to optimize when we are going into Azure. I think that step is very important. That we are just that we are sure that we are talking about Apple versus Apple, not Apple versus something else.
Absolutely, it is doable. The confidence is very high. It's absolutely doable. And then I mean, it's just coming down to crunching the number and making sure we are able to profile it and then scale it or map it correctly. Once you map it correctly, things are going to really be fine. Right. Take the source requirement, map it, you're good to go.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Yeah. So Anbu, Momin, thank you very much for joining us on our podcast today. That was a really interesting insight. And I'm sure maybe next year we'll talk about a 200 terabyte.
There you go. We're shooting for it.
No, not just double. Not double.
Okay.
Let's go to petabyte.
So great. Thank you so much. I hope to see you again on the podcast. Thank you very much, and
thank you soon. It was great.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.